You have extensive rights if your flights are cancelled, but the rules are complex. This video covers those rights and explains when you can claim compensation, why insurance is still important, and what your travel rights are if you need to cancel your flight. In this video, I'll explain your rights to assistance and compensation if your flight gets cancelled, when an airline can avoid paying out, and the position if you cancel your flight. I'm Daniel Barnett, a barrister practicing in central London, and I'm the presenter of the Legal Hour on LBC Radio. This is one of a series of videos I've recorded on your rights when travelling. To stay up to date, please do subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell to make sure you're alerted to all my Legal Explainer videos. I'll give you 4 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. If your flight is cancelled, you're likely to be protected by a piece of EU legislation, even though we're not in the EU anymore, called the Denied Boarding Regulation. This continues to apply in the UK after Brexit. It applies if your flight is from the UK or from an EU country, or your flight is to the UK or to the EU and is operated by an UK or an EU airline. If your flight's cancelled, Article 8 of the Denied Boarding Regulation says your airline must offer you the choice between reimbursement within 7 days of the full cost of your ticket at the price at which it was bought, an alternative flight to your destination as soon as possible, rerouting under comparable transport conditions to your final destination at the earliest opportunity, or rerouting on an alternative flight to the original destination on a later date, at your convenience, subject to seats being available. The choice is yours and yours alone. If you choose to be reimbursed, you must be refunded for all parts of the journey you haven't made, along with any parts that no longer serve any purpose. So if you're partway through several flights that form a single ticket, you must also be flown back to the airport where you started your journey for free. If you choose to be rerouted, it doesn't have to be by the same airline. If another operator's flight reaches the same destination significantly sooner than your airline's, you can argue you should be rerouted that way, with the airline picking up the bill. An airline can also offer you a flight to a different airport serving the same city or region. If it does, Paragraph 3 makes it responsible for the cost of getting you from the new airport to the original airport or to another close by destination agreed with the passenger. Article 9 also provides customers whose flights have been cancelled with a so-called right to care. You must be offered meals and refreshments in a reasonable relation to the waiting time, meaning the longer you wait, the more the airline must provide. The airline also has to offer you 2 free phone calls or emails or, says the law, faxes. If you've chosen to be rerouted on another flight, and the reasonably expected departure time of that flight isn't the same day as the cancelled flight, the airline must also offer you hotel accommodation if necessary. There's no time limit on the length of this, so airlines have an incentive to reroute you quickly. You must also be offered free transport between the airport and hotel. In addition to these rights, where an airline cancels your flight, it's often obliged to compensate you with cash. Though the rights I've just mentioned apply to all cancellations, Article 5(1)(c) of the Denied Boarding Regulation makes clear that the right to compensation is more limited. Firstly, an airline never needs to pay you compensation if you were informed of the cancellation at least 2 weeks before the scheduled time of departure. Secondly, compensation isn't payable if the airline informed you of the cancellation between 2 weeks and 7 days before the scheduled time of departure and offered you rerouting by an alternative flight. Now, the alternative flight must depart no more than 2 hours before the time the cancelled flight was due to depart, and it must arrive no later than 4 hours after the scheduled time of the original aeroplane. Thirdly, compensation isn't payable if you were informed of the cancellation less than 7 days before the scheduled time of departure and the airline offered you rerouting by an alternative flight. Where the airline informs you of the cancellation this close to your scheduled flight, the alternative flight has to depart no more than an hour before the time the cancelled flight was due to depart, and it must reach the destination no more than 2 hours after the scheduled time of arrival. If it reaches the destination 2.5 hours after the original scheduled time, you're entitled to compensation. Fourth and finally, compensation is never payable if the airline can show that the cancellation is caused by extraordinary circumstances which could not have been avoided even if all reasonable measures had been taken. So what are extraordinary circumstances? Case law suggests the following are likely to count: terrorist attacks, political unrest, bird strikes, security issues, passenger illness, unavoidable safety problems, bad weather, a natural disaster like a volcanic eruption, and air traffic management decisions that delay a flight even though the airline's taken all reasonable measures to avoid it. Now, if the cancellation is due to a strike, the European, by which I mean an industrial action strike, not a bird strike, the European Court of Justice case called Krüsemann and TUIfly suggests that compensation may depend on which staff are on strike. If the flight was cancelled because the airline's own staff are on strike, this isn't an extraordinary circumstance and therefore compensation is payable. But if the strike is by other related staff, such as airport baggage handlers or air traffic control operators, this will count as an extraordinary circumstance and the airline can avoid paying out. If you are entitled to compensation, the amount depends on the length of your flight. This is complicated. If the flight is 1,500 kilometres or less, the amount is £220 per person. For flights between 1,500 and 3,500 kilometres, it's £350 per person. And for any flight longer than 3,500 kilometres, it's £520 per person. But the airline is entitled to halve this compensation if it's offered you rerouting on an alternative flight and it arrives at its destination within a certain period after the scheduled arrival time of the cancelled flight. Here we go again. For flights of 1,500 kilometres or less, the replacement flight must arrive within 2 hours of the scheduled time. For flights between 1,500 and 3,500 kilometres, it must arrive within 3 hours. For flights over 3,500 kilometres, it must arrive within 4 hours. Article 7.3 requires the compensation to be provided by cash, cheque or bank transfer within 7 days, unless you sign a document to say you'll accept travel vouchers instead. This is generally only worth doing where the value of the travel voucher is higher than the required amount of cash. Missing out on a flight can of course lead to additional losses, for instance hotel bookings and the cost of onward travel. Article 19 of the Montreal Convention 1999 is clear that airlines are liable for damage occasioned by delay in the carriage by air of passengers, unless they can show they took all measures that can reasonably be required to avoid the damage, or that it was impossible for them to take such measures. This means airlines could be liable, could be responsible for reimbursing other losses caused by a late cancellation. Article 22 caps airlines' liability for delay to around £5,500 per passenger. But getting an airline to pay out for these types of loss can be tricky, and it's likely to be more straightforward to claim under the cancellation coverage element of your travel insurance. Some insurance policies also provide additional compensation if it's not available under the denied boarding regulation, for example, where extraordinary circumstances apply. Whether you can cancel your flight and how much you need to pay to do it depends on the contract you entered into with the airline when you bought your tickets. Though Section 62 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015 prevents airlines from enforcing unfair terms against a consumer, a cancellation fee is likely to be considered fair, even where it's as much as or more than the original flight. If you have travel insurance, its cancellation and curtailment provisions may cover the cost of an unused flight, in particular circumstances such as bereavement, redundancy or COVID-19. check your policy for details. If you're not covered by travel cancellation insurance and you can't obtain a refund or rebook for a more convenient time, it's worth checking whether the flight is subsequently cancelled. Article 3.2 makes it clear you don't need to be present at the airport to claim a refund or compensation or rerouting on a later date. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, you might also be interested in this video or in subscribing to my channel for more legal explainer videos. I'm Barrister Daniel Barnett. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.